My name is Jessica, and 3 years ago, my sister sold our family for a paycheck. I know that sounds dramatic, but if you stay with me until the end, you'll understand why those words aren't an exaggeration. Growing up, Emily wasn't just my sister. She was my best friend. We shared a bedroom, borrowed each other's clothes, and promised we'd always put family first no matter what happened. When our father died unexpectedly, that promise became even more important. It was just Mom, Emily, and me against the world. At least, that's what I believed. Then money entered the picture. Not lottery money. Not millionaire money. Just enough money to reveal who Emily really was. It started when our grandfather became sick. He owned a successful family business and several properties. Everyone knew there would eventually be an inheritance, but nobody talked about it openly. At family dinners, we focused on Grandpa's health. We focused on making memories. Or at least most of us did. Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. The way Emily suddenly volunteered to manage Grandpa's finances. The way she asked strange questions about his will. The way she kept reminding everyone how much she sacrificed for the family. At the time, I thought she was being responsible. I was wrong. Because while the rest of us were worried about losing Grandpa, Emily was already calculating what she might gain from his death. And the worst part? We didn't discover her betrayal until it was too late. By the time the truth came out, our family was destroyed, our business was hanging by a thread, and Emily had made a decision that would cost her everything she thought she was winning. But before she lost everything, she almost took everything from us. And what I found hidden inside Grandpa's safe changed my life forever. Growing up, our family wasn't wealthy, but we were close. Mom worked as a nurse for over 20 years. She spent long shifts helping strangers and somehow still found energy to take care of us when she got home. My younger sister Emily was 3 years younger than me. She was outgoing, charming, and naturally persuasive. People loved her almost instantly. Teachers loved her. Neighbors loved her. Even complete strangers seemed drawn to her confidence. I was the opposite. I was quiet, practical, and preferred staying out of the spotlight. Despite our differences, we were close. At least that's what everyone believed. After Dad passed away when I was 23, our grandfather became the emotional center of our family. Grandpa Richard owned a construction company he'd built from nothing. He wasn't rich, but he was comfortable. The business provided jobs for dozens of employees. It also represented Dad's legacy because Dad had worked there before his death. Every Sunday, the entire family gathered at Grandpa's house. Those dinners became sacred. One evening, while helping clear dishes, I overheard something unusual. Emily was sitting beside Grandpa. "Grandpa," she said casually, "have you ever updated your will?" I froze. Grandpa chuckled. "That's a strange question. I'm just being practical." "Practical about my death?" Emily laughed. "You know that's not what I mean." At the time, I brushed it off. But similar conversations kept happening. Questions about properties. Questions about business ownership. Questions about financial accounts. When I mentioned it to Mom, she shrugged. "Emily worries about details. That's all." Maybe. But something felt different. Then Grandpa suffered a minor stroke. Thankfully he recovered. However, the incident scared everyone. Especially Emily. Or so it appeared. Suddenly she became heavily involved in Grandpa's affairs. Doctor appointments. Financial paperwork. Business meetings. She presented herself as the devoted granddaughter stepping up during a difficult time. Everyone praised her. Everyone except me. Because every time I tried to help, Emily somehow pushed me aside. "I've got it covered. You don't need to worry." Grandpa trusts me. Those words started appearing more frequently. Then one afternoon, Grandpa called me privately. Jessica, promise me something. What is it? If anything ever happens to me, keep this family together. I smiled. Of course. He looked strangely worried. I mean it. Something in his voice unsettled me. Before I could ask questions, Emily walked into the room. The conversation ended immediately. At the time, I didn't understand why Grandpa seemed so concerned. A few months later, I would. Because that was the last meaningful conversation we ever had. And the day after Grandpa's next hospital visit, Emily made an announcement that changed everything. The day after Grandpa's hospital visit, Emily called a family meeting. That alone was unusual. Normally, Mom organized family gatherings. Emily rarely took charge unless there was something she specifically wanted. When I arrived at Grandpa's house, everyone was already there. Our Aunt Linda sat quietly at the dining table. Uncle Mark stood near the kitchen doorway. Mom looked exhausted after another long shift at the hospital. And Emily? She stood at the head of the table like she was running a board meeting. Thanks for coming, she said. I exchanged a glance with Mom. Something felt off. Emily cleared her throat. As everyone knows, Grandpa's health has become unpredictable. Grandpa frowned. I'm sitting right here, Emily. A few people laughed nervously. I'm only being realistic, she replied. Then she pulled out a folder. The room instantly grew quiet. What is that? Uncle Mark asked. Information. Emily opened the folder and began distributing papers. Since Grandpa needs more support, I've created a plan to help manage his finances, appointments, and business responsibilities. I looked down at the documents. Every major responsibility had Emily's name beside it. Business oversight. Financial coordination. Property management. Medical scheduling. Almost everything. What exactly is this? I asked. A family solution. It looks like you're putting yourself in charge of everything. Emily smiled politely. No. I'm volunteering to help. The difference sounded small. But everyone in the room could hear it. Grandpa studied the papers without speaking. For several uncomfortable seconds, nobody said anything. Then Mom finally spoke. Emily, this seems a little excessive. Why? Because Grandpa is still capable of making his own decisions. Emily's smile tightened. I'm trying to reduce stress. Grandpa folded the papers. I appreciate the concern. The room relaxed. Then he added, but I don't need anyone taking over my life. For the first time all evening, Emily looked genuinely annoyed. Only for a second. Then the expression disappeared. Of course, Grandpa. The meeting ended shortly afterward. As everyone left, I noticed Emily gathering the papers with unusually rough movements. She wasn't handling rejection very well. Outside, Mom sighed. Your sister means well. I wasn't so sure. Over the next several weeks, Emily doubled down. She accompanied Grandpa everywhere. She attended every doctor appointment. She inserted herself into every business discussion. Employees started calling her before calling Grandpa. Clients assumed she was already running things. And somehow, nobody seemed bothered by it except me. One evening, I visited Grandpa unexpectedly. When I entered the house, raised voices echoed from his office. I stopped near the hallway. Emily was inside. You're being stubborn. Grandpa sounded irritated. And you're being disrespectful. I'm trying to protect this family. No, Emily. A long silence followed. Then Grandpa spoke again. His voice was calm but firm. Stop treating my future like it's a business transaction. My stomach dropped. I wasn't supposed to hear that. A few seconds later, the office door opened. I quickly stepped away. Emily emerged first. The moment she saw me, her face changed. Instantly. Like a switch had been flipped. Jessica. Her cheerful tone felt completely artificial. How long have you been here? Just arrived. Technically true. Her eyes searched mine, trying to determine whether I'd heard anything. Finally she smiled. Grandpa's inside. I walked past her. When I entered the office, Grandpa looked exhausted. Everything okay? He forced a smile. Family disagreements. About what? His expression became thoughtful. Then he shook his head. Nothing you need to worry about. But I was worried. More than ever. A few days later, another strange thing happened. I received a phone call from one of the construction company's senior employees. His name was Frank. He'd worked for Grandpa for nearly 20 years. Jessica, he said quietly, can I ask you something? Sure. Did Grandpa officially put Emily in charge? What? Frank hesitated. She's been making decisions. My heart sank. What kind of decisions? Budget approvals. Hiring recommendations. Vendor negotiations. I nearly dropped my phone. Grandpa approved this. That's what she claims. After hanging up, I drove directly to Grandpa's house. I found him sitting on the back porch. When I explained what Frank told me, his face darkened immediately. I never authorized that. What are you going to do? He stared across the yard. Then he said something that sent a chill down my spine. I think it's time I make a few things absolutely clear. What does that mean? It means I've waited too long. For the first time, Grandpa looked disappointed. Not angry. Not frustrated. Disappointed. And somehow that felt worse. The following week, he scheduled a meeting with his attorney. Nobody knew exactly why. But Emily found out. And her reaction shocked everyone. She started calling relatives nonstop. She suddenly became emotional. She cried during family dinners. She talked about feeling unappreciated. She claimed people questioned her loyalty after everything she'd done. The timing wasn't subtle. It felt like she was preparing the family for something. Or manipulating them. Maybe both. Then came the night everything changed. Around midnight, my phone rang. It was Grandpa's neighbor. His voice sounded panicked. Jessica, you need to come here. My heart stopped. What's wrong? There was an argument. Between who? A pause. Then he answered. Your grandfather and Emily. I grabbed my keys immediately. As I drove through the dark streets, my mind raced through every possibility. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found when I arrived. Because parked outside Grandpa's house was a police car. And standing on the front lawn, crying dramatically while speaking to an officer, was Emily. The moment she saw me, her expression changed. Not to relief. Not to fear. To something far more unsettling. Almost like satisfaction. And when the officer turned toward me and asked a single question, I realized this family drama had just become something much bigger. Ma'am, he said. Do you know anything about allegations of financial coercion inside this family? The officer's question hit me like a punch to the chest. Do you know anything about allegations of financial coercion inside this family? For a moment, I just stared at him. What? The officer glanced toward Emily. She immediately lowered her eyes and wiped away a tear. My stomach twisted. Something was very wrong. Your sister has made a statement, the officer explained carefully. We're gathering information. I looked directly at Emily. What statement? She sniffled dramatically. I didn't want it to come to this. The words sounded rehearsed. Almost practiced. I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. Emily, what did you tell them? Before she could answer, Grandpa's front door opened. Grandpa stepped outside. His face was red with anger. I'll tell you exactly what happened. The officer turned toward him. Grandpa pointed directly at Emily. She accused me of being manipulated. Silence. The officer looked confused. So you're saying, I'm saying my granddaughter doesn't like my decisions, so she's trying to make everyone think I'm mentally incapable. My heart dropped. The pieces suddenly came together. Emily wasn't worried about Grandpa being influenced. She was trying to establish that he couldn't make financial decisions on his own. The realization made me sick. The officer asked several more questions. Eventually it became obvious there was no criminal issue. No evidence. No victim. No case. Just a family conflict that had escalated far beyond normal boundaries. After the officers left, Grandpa walked back inside without saying another word. Emily followed him. I followed both of them. The argument that erupted inside that house changed our family forever. Grandpa stood in the living room. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine fury in his eyes. What exactly are you trying to accomplish? Emily crossed her arms. I'm protecting this family. No. His voice echoed through the room. You're protecting yourself. Mom arrived a few minutes later after receiving my phone call. When she entered, she immediately sensed the tension. What's happening? Nobody answered right away. Then Grandpa finally spoke. Emily believes she knows better than everyone else. Emily laughed bitterly. That's not fair. Isn't it? You've been making irresponsible decisions. The room went silent. Even Mom looked shocked. Grandpa stared at her. Irresponsible? Yes. You mean decisions you don't control. Emily's face hardened. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then she said something none of us expected. Maybe somebody needs to control them. The silence that followed felt endless. Mom's eyes widened. Emily. But the damage was done. Grandpa slowly shook his head. I think we're finished here. The next morning, the family received shocking news. Grandpa had officially removed Emily from all involvement in his business affairs. Every responsibility. Every authorization. Everything. Employees were instructed to report directly to him or his attorney. Not Emily. Never Emily. The reaction was immediate. Emily exploded. She called everyone. She complained to relatives. She told anyone willing to listen that she was being punished for caring too much. Some people believed her. Others didn't. The family started dividing into sides. And suddenly I became the villain too. Apparently, because I supported Grandpa's decision, I was now part of the problem. The accusations spread quickly. I was jealous. I was manipulating Grandpa. I wanted the inheritance for myself. None of it was true. But rumors don't need truth to survive. They only need people willing to repeat them. Within weeks, family gatherings became unbearable. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Relatives whispered behind my back. Even people I'd known my entire life began treating me differently. One afternoon, Aunt Linda called me. Her voice sounded hesitant. Jessica, can I ask you something? Sure. Did you convince Grandpa to remove Emily? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No. She says you've been turning him against her. I closed my eyes. Of course she did. That had become Emily's strategy. Every consequence was somebody else's fault. Nothing was ever her responsibility. The situation grew worse when Grandpa announced another major decision. He was restructuring ownership of several properties. The announcement triggered chaos. Relatives immediately started speculating about inheritances. Arguments erupted. People who had barely visited Grandpa suddenly appeared every weekend. Everyone seemed interested in his health. And his assets. Mostly his assets. Meanwhile, Grandpa became quieter. More withdrawn. More disappointed. One evening, I visited him after work. We sat together on the porch. The same porch where we'd shared so many conversations. I failed somewhere, he said quietly. I looked at him. What do you mean? I spent my life teaching people how to build businesses. He stared into the distance. But maybe I forgot to teach them how to value people. The sadness in his voice broke my heart. You didn't fail. He smiled sadly. Sometimes money reveals things that were already there. I thought about Emily. About the accusations. The manipulation. The constant obsession with control. Maybe he was right. Maybe money wasn't creating these problems. Maybe it was exposing them. A few days later, Grandpa's attorney contacted me. That surprised me immediately. Why would his attorney need to speak with me? When we met, he handed me a sealed envelope. Your grandfather asked me to give you this if certain situations continued. I frowned. What situations? The attorney hesitated. Then he answered. If the conflict escalated. My pulse quickened. What is it? I haven't read it. I looked down at the envelope. My name was written across the front in Grandpa's handwriting. Something about it made me uneasy. Deeply uneasy. That night, I took the envelope home. For nearly an hour, it sat unopened on my kitchen table. Finally, I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. At first, it seemed ordinary. Then I reached the second page. And everything changed. Because Grandpa revealed a secret he had been hiding for years. A secret involving Emily. A secret involving our father. And a truth so devastating that suddenly her obsession with money started making a lot more sense. But if what Grandpa wrote was true, then our family had been living a lie for nearly 2 decades. My hands were shaking by the time I reached the second page of Grandpa's letter. I read the paragraph once. Then again. Then a third time. Each reading felt more unbelievable than the last. The words seemed impossible. Yet they were written in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. I sat frozen at my kitchen table long after midnight. The letter explained something Grandpa had hidden for almost 20 years. A secret involving my father. A secret involving Emily. And a mistake that had quietly shaped our family without any of us realizing it. According to Grandpa, shortly before Dad died, he had loaned a large amount of money to one of his closest friends. The man had promised to repay it within a year. Instead, he disappeared. The loss nearly destroyed the construction company. For several years, Grandpa struggled to keep the business alive. The stress affected everyone. Including my father. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part came next. Dad had discovered evidence suggesting the missing money wasn't entirely stolen. A significant portion had been secretly transferred by someone inside the family. Someone Dad trusted. Someone he never publicly exposed. Because exposing them would have shattered the family. I stared at the page. Then I kept reading. Grandpa never identified the person directly. But he wrote something that chilled me. If you are reading this, Jessica, I believe Emily has already begun repeating a pattern she does not even understand. A pattern. Not a coincidence. Not bad luck. A pattern. I turned the page. Grandpa explained that years earlier, before Emily was old enough to remember, she had witnessed constant arguments involving money. Arguments nobody thought she understood. Arguments about debts. Property. Inheritance. Control. Over time, she developed an unhealthy belief. She started associating money with safety. Power with security. Control with love. The more I read, the more confused I became. Was Grandpa excusing her behavior? Trying to explain it? Or warning me? Then I reached the final section. And that's when my heart nearly stopped. Grandpa believed someone else was influencing Emily. Someone outside the family. Someone he didn't trust. The letter ended abruptly. No names. No explanation. No details. Just one sentence. Follow the money. That was it. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I drove straight to Grandpa's house. I wanted answers. Unfortunately, I arrived to find an ambulance parked outside. My stomach dropped instantly. Several relatives stood near the front door. Mom was crying. The moment I saw her face, I knew. Grandpa had suffered another stroke during the night. This one was much worse. At the hospital, doctors did everything they could. For 3 days, our family waited. For 3 days, everyone sat together pretending the previous months hadn't happened. Even Emily. She cried constantly. Held Mom's hand. Spoke softly to nurses. Anyone watching would have seen a grieving granddaughter. Maybe part of it was genuine. Maybe not. By then, I didn't know what to believe. On the 4th day, Grandpa passed away. The news shattered us. Despite everything, he had been the center of our family. The person who held everyone together. Without him, the cracks immediately widened. The funeral was heartbreaking. Hundreds of people attended. Employees. Friends. Neighbors. Former business partners. One after another, they shared stories about Grandpa's generosity. His integrity. His loyalty. Listening to them made me realize something. The values Grandpa spent his entire life building were exactly the values our family was now abandoning. Especially Emily. The real battle began after the funeral. Everyone knew the reading of the will was coming. Nobody said it directly. But the tension was obvious. Relatives suddenly became very interested in legal paperwork. Phone calls increased. Private conversations multiplied. Whispers followed every gathering. Then something unexpected happened. A week before the will reading, one of Grandpa's longtime accountants contacted me. His name was Walter. He sounded nervous. Jessica, we need to meet. Why? It's about Emily. My pulse quickened. What about her? Not over the phone. We met at a small cafe downtown. Walter arrived carrying several folders. The moment he sat down, I knew this wasn't going to be good. He opened one folder. Inside were copies of financial records. Bank transfers. Business invoices. Property documents. I stared at the pages. What am I looking at? Walter took a deep breath. For the last 18 months, someone has been attempting to position themselves to gain control of company assets. A chill ran through my body. What do you mean? He pointed to several documents. These transactions. I studied them. At first they seemed harmless. Then patterns emerged. Repeated attempts to move responsibilities. Repeated efforts to gain signing authority. Repeated requests for ownership reviews. Every trail led to one person. Emily. My chest tightened. This can't be real. I wish it wasn't. Walter leaned closer. Jessica, whoever advised her knew exactly what they were doing. The words from Grandpa's letter echoed inside my head. Someone else was influencing Emily. Someone outside the family. Someone he didn't trust. I looked up. Do you know who helped her? Walter nodded slowly. Then he slid one final document across the table. A consulting agreement. At the bottom was a signature. The name hit me like a truck. Ryan Mercer. Emily's boyfriend. The same boyfriend she claimed had nothing to do with family matters. The same boyfriend who constantly encouraged her to think bigger. To demand more. To stop letting people hold her back. Suddenly everything started making sense. The pressure. The manipulation. The obsession with control. But before I could process what I was seeing, Walter revealed one final bombshell. The consulting agreement wasn't recent. It had been signed almost 2 years ago. Which meant this wasn't a sudden mistake. This wasn't emotional decision-making. This wasn't grief. This wasn't misunderstanding. Emily and Ryan had been planning something for years. And if the documents were accurate, the reading of Grandpa's will wasn't going to end the conflict. It was about to start a war. For several days after meeting Walter, I walked around in a fog. I couldn't stop thinking about the documents. Or Grandpa's letter. Or Ryan Mercer. The deeper I looked, the worse everything seemed. I kept asking myself the same question. How long had Emily been planning this? Months? Years? Had every act of kindness been genuine? Or had she been positioning herself the entire time? I hated even thinking that way. She was still my sister. The girl who used to stay awake with me during thunderstorms. The girl who defended me against school bullies. The girl who cried beside me at Dad's funeral. But every new piece of evidence made it harder to recognize that person. The reading of Grandpa's will was scheduled for the following Monday. By then, rumors were spreading everywhere. Relatives were making predictions. Some believed Emily would inherit the business. Others believed Grandpa had cut her out entirely. Everyone seemed obsessed with the outcome. Almost nobody seemed focused on the fact that we just buried him. On Sunday evening, Mom invited me over. When I arrived, she looked exhausted. The previous weeks had aged her noticeably. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes. Her shoulders seemed heavier. As if she were carrying the entire family by herself. I need to ask you something, she said quietly. I sat across from her. What is it? She hesitated. Then she asked the question I had been dreading. Do you think Emily really changed? For several seconds, I couldn't answer. Because I honestly didn't know. I paused. I think she's lost. Mom lowered her eyes. That's what scares me. We sat in silence. Then she surprised me. Ryan has been around a lot longer than I admitted. I looked up. What do you mean? Mom sighed. Your grandfather never trusted him. That got my attention immediately. Why not? He thought Ryan cared too much about money. I almost laughed at the understatement. Mom continued. Every conversation eventually turned into investments, business opportunities, property values, or financial strategies. That matched everything Walter had told me. Everything Grandpa had hinted at. Everything I was beginning to suspect. The next morning, the family gathered at the attorney's office. The atmosphere was tense. Very tense. Everyone tried acting polite. Nobody succeeded. Emily arrived with Ryan. That alone annoyed several relatives. The will reading was supposed to be a family matter. Yet there he was. Confident. Relaxed. Smiling. Almost like he already knew something everyone else didn't. I noticed Grandpa's attorney watching him carefully. That observation would become important later. The reading began. At first, everything seemed straightforward. Specific gifts went to various relatives. Charitable donations were outlined. Several longtime employees received financial bonuses. The room remained calm. Then the attorney reached the section everyone had been waiting for. The business. The properties. The largest assets. I watched Emily sit up slightly. Ryan did the same. The attorney adjusted his glasses. Then he began reading. Grandpa's ownership interests would not be transferred to a single family member. Instead, a trust had been created. A professional management board would oversee operations. Major decisions would require multiple approvals. No individual family member would gain control. The room erupted. Questions flew in every direction. Arguments started immediately. Emily looked stunned. Ryan looked furious. The attorney raised his hand. There's more. Everyone became quiet again. Then came the second surprise. Grandpa had left personal letters to several family members, including Emily. The attorney handed her a sealed envelope. For a moment, she simply stared at it. Then she opened it. As she read, her expression changed. Confusion. Shock. Embarrassment. Anger. I had never seen so many emotions cross someone's face so quickly. What does it say? Ryan whispered. Emily folded the letter immediately. Nothing. The answer came too fast. Too defensive. Too suspicious. Something in that letter had rattled her badly. The meeting ended shortly afterward. Most relatives left frustrated. Some left relieved. Nobody left happy. Outside the building, I watched Emily and Ryan arguing near the parking lot. They didn't notice me standing nearby. You told me he'd never do this, Ryan snapped. Emily looked panicked. I was wrong. Clearly. His tone shocked me. There was no comfort. No support. No sympathy. Only anger. Pure anger. For the first time, I saw their relationship differently. This wasn't a partnership. This was a transaction. Ryan stepped closer. What about the other properties? I don't know. You said you knew. I thought I did. The conversation ended when they noticed me. Instantly both fell silent. Ryan walked away. Emily stared at me. For a second, she looked genuinely vulnerable. Not manipulative. Not calculating. Just scared. Then the moment disappeared. The walls went back up. That evening, Mom received a phone call. The trust overseeing Grandpa's business had discovered something troubling. Several financial requests submitted during the previous year required immediate review. Guess whose name appeared repeatedly? Emily's. An internal investigation began. Nothing criminal. Nothing illegal. But highly questionable. Several proposed transactions would have benefited individuals connected to Ryan's consulting network. The discovery created chaos. Word spread quickly. Relatives who had defended Emily began distancing themselves. Friends stopped returning her calls. Family members who once supported her suddenly became silent. The social damage was immediate. The emotional damage was worse. Within weeks, Emily's reputation collapsed. People no longer saw the devoted granddaughter. They saw someone who appeared willing to put personal gain ahead of family trust. Then came another blow. Ryan disappeared. Not physically, but emotionally. The moment problems appeared, he became unavailable. Calls went unanswered. Messages received short replies. Meetings were cancelled. Support vanished. Exactly when Emily needed him most. One night, she showed up at Mom's house unexpectedly. I happened to be there. When Mom opened the door, Emily looked exhausted. Her eyes were red. Her makeup was smeared. And for the first time in months, she wasn't acting confident. She sat at the kitchen table in complete silence. Finally Mom asked, "What's wrong?" Emily stared at the floor. Then she whispered something none of us expected. Ryan left. The room fell silent. He said, "I'm a liability now." Mom's face crumpled. No matter what had happened, she was still her daughter. Emily started crying. Real crying. Not the dramatic tears we'd seen before. These were different. Painful. Broken. Humiliating. And as I watched her fall apart, I realized something terrifying. She hadn't just lost money. She hadn't just lost influence. She hadn't just lost Ryan. She was losing the family too. And the worst part. The biggest secret hadn't even been revealed yet. Because 2 days later, Grandpa's attorney called another emergency meeting. And what he planned to expose would force Emily to finally face the truth she had spent years avoiding. 2 days after Emily showed up at Mom's house, everyone gathered once again at Grandpa's attorney's office. Nobody wanted to be there. But nobody wanted to miss it either. The phone call had been brief. Urgent. Mandatory. Those were the attorney's exact words. As I entered the conference room, I immediately noticed how different things felt compared to the will reading. Back then, people were curious. Now they were nervous. Very nervous. Mom sat quietly beside me. Aunt Linda avoided eye contact with almost everyone. Uncle Mark looked irritated. And Emily? She looked exhausted. The confident woman who had spent months trying to control everything was gone. Her shoulders slumped. Dark circles surrounded her eyes. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then Ryan walked into the room. Every head turned. Emily looked stunned. Clearly she hadn't expected him to show up. Neither had I. Ryan pulled out a chair and sat down without speaking. His expression remained calm. Too calm. Like a man still convinced he could talk his way out of anything. The attorney entered a few moments later carrying several folders. He placed them on the table. Then he looked directly at Ryan. "I'll begin with the reason we're here." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The room became completely silent. Over the previous week, the trust's investigators had reviewed thousands of financial records connected to Grandpa's business. At first, they were simply looking for procedural irregularities. What they found was much larger. The attorney opened one of the folders. Inside were dozens of documents. Consulting agreements. Business proposals. Draft ownership structures. Private communications. The deeper investigators looked, the more connections they found between Ryan and several outside investors. Investors who had shown unusual interest in acquiring portions of Grandpa's company. My stomach tightened. I already knew some of this. But judging from the reactions around me, most people didn't. The attorney continued. Several proposed transactions would have gradually shifted influence away from the family and toward outside parties. Nothing illegal. Nothing fraudulent. But absolutely against Grandpa's wishes. The room exploded with questions. What does that mean? Who approved this? How far did it go? The attorney raised his hand. Then he delivered the answer everyone was waiting for. The proposals originated through Ryan Mercer. Every eye turned toward him. Ryan remained surprisingly calm. Those were business opportunities. Grandpa's attorney nodded. That's one interpretation. It's the correct interpretation. For the first time, irritation appeared on the attorney's face. Your interpretation benefits you financially. Ryan crossed his arms. That's how business works. The statement instantly angered several relatives. I watched Emily closely. Her face had gone completely pale. Slowly, she turned toward Ryan. You told me this was about helping Grandpa. Ryan didn't answer. You told me we were protecting the company. Still nothing. The silence itself became an answer. For months, Emily had defended him. Trusted him. Chosen him. And now she was beginning to understand the truth. Mom finally spoke. Emily, did you know? The question hung in the air. Everyone waited. Emily's eyes filled with tears. No. Ryan laughed softly. The sound sent chills down my spine. No. Emily stared at him. What does that mean? Ryan leaned back in his chair. Then he said something that shattered whatever remained of their relationship. It means you knew enough. The room fell silent. Emily looked devastated. You used me. Ryan shrugged. You wanted the same thing I did. No. Really? His voice grew sharper. You wanted control. I wanted security. You wanted power. I wanted to help my family. Ryan laughed again. This time nobody missed the contempt in his voice. You keep telling yourself that. I watched Emily's face crumble. Because deep down, she knew there was some truth in what he was saying. Not all of it. But enough. She hadn't started this journey intending to destroy the family. I believed that. But somewhere along the way, she stopped caring about the difference between helping and controlling. And once that line disappeared, everything else followed. The attorney opened another folder. There is one final matter. The room became quiet again. Inside the folder was a letter. A second letter. One nobody had seen before. Written by Grandpa shortly before his death. The attorney began reading. The letter wasn't about money. It wasn't about business. It wasn't about property. It was about family. Specifically, Emily. Grandpa wrote that he loved her deeply. That he always would. But he feared she was becoming someone who measured love through financial value. Someone who confused ownership with loyalty. Someone who believed having control meant having importance. The words hit hard. Especially because they were true. Then came the final paragraph. A paragraph that left several people crying. Including me. Including Mom. And especially Emily. If Emily is hearing this, I want her to understand something. Money can buy comfort. It can buy influence. It can buy attention. But it cannot buy trust. And once trust is gone, rebuilding it is harder than earning any fortune. The room remained silent after the attorney finished reading. Nobody knew what to say. Finally, Emily stood up. Tears streamed down her face. For months, she'd argued. Defended herself. Blamed others. Justified every decision. This time she did none of those things. Instead, she turned toward Mom. I'm sorry. Mom immediately began crying. Then Emily looked at me. The silence between us felt enormous. Years of memories. Months of betrayal. Countless arguments. all standing between us. I'm sorry, she whispered again. I wanted to be angry. Part of me still was. But looking at her now, I wasn't seeing a mastermind. I wasn't seeing a villain. I was seeing someone who had lost everything chasing something she thought would make her happy. And now she finally understood the cost. Ryan stood and headed toward the door. Nobody stopped him. Nobody cared. His influence had evaporated. His plans had failed. His opportunity was gone. Just before leaving, he looked back. Then he walked out of our lives forever. The door closed behind him. And for the first time in over a year, the room felt lighter. But one question still remained. Could our family ever recover from what had happened? Because apologies were easy. Trust was something else entirely. And the answer wouldn't come from a courtroom, a business document, or an inheritance. It would come from what Emily chose to do next. Because losing money had hurt. Losing Ryan had hurt. But proving she deserved a second chance would be the hardest battle of her life. The months after that meeting were some of the quietest our family had experienced in years. Not peaceful. Just quiet. There was a difference. The arguments stopped. The accusations stopped. The endless rumors stopped. But the damage remained. Trust doesn't return overnight. Once broken, it leaves scars. And our family had plenty of those. For a while, Emily disappeared from family gatherings. Not because anyone banned her. She simply stayed away. I think she was embarrassed. Maybe ashamed. Probably both. Mom worried constantly. Every few days she'd mention Emily. She sounded tired when I called. She says she's looking for work. She asked how you're doing. I listened but rarely responded. Part of me still wasn't ready. I had spent over a year watching my sister put money, control, and ambition ahead of the people who loved her most. An apology didn't erase that. Still, I couldn't completely shut her out. She was my sister. And despite everything, that meant something. About 3 months later, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Emily. For several seconds I stared at the screen before answering. Hello? There was a pause. Then her voice came through softly. Hi. The conversation was awkward immediately. Neither of us knew where to begin. Finally she broke the silence. I don't expect forgiveness. I leaned back in my chair. Okay. I just wanted to tell you something. I waited. Then she said the last thing I expected. You were right. For a moment I didn't know how to respond. Not because I wanted to hear those words. But because Emily almost never admitted she was wrong. Ever. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, she continued. I know. But I did. The honesty surprised me. For the first time in a very long time, she wasn't defending herself. She wasn't making excuses. She wasn't blaming Ryan. She wasn't blaming circumstances. She was accepting responsibility. And that mattered. Over the following months, small changes began appearing. Emily found a regular office job. Nothing glamorous. Nothing impressive. No executive titles. No ownership opportunities. No shortcuts. Just honest work. She rented a small apartment. Sold several expensive items she'd purchased during her success phase. Started living within her means. And perhaps most importantly, she stopped chasing status. The transformation wasn't dramatic. It was gradual. Slow. Real. The kind of change that happens when someone finally learns a painful lesson. One afternoon, nearly a year after Grandpa's death, Mom convinced both of us to meet for lunch. I almost declined. But eventually I agreed. The lunch started awkwardly. Then something unexpected happened. We laughed. Not forced laughter. Real laughter. The kind we used to share growing up. For the first time in years, it felt like I was talking to my sister again. Not the person she'd become. The person she'd once been. At one point she looked at me and smiled sadly. You know what the worst part was? What? I thought I was winning. The statement hit me harder than she probably realized. Because it perfectly summarized everything. She had spent years pursuing what she believed success looked like. Control. Influence. Money. Power. And every step toward those goals pushed her further away from the people who mattered most. By the time she realized what was happening, she had nearly lost all of it. The family business continued operating successfully under the trust structure Grandpa created. Employees remained secure. The company grew steadily. Without family power struggles interfering. Ironically, Grandpa's final plan worked exactly as intended. No single person controlled everything. Which meant nobody could abuse that control. As for Ryan, we occasionally heard rumors through mutual acquaintances. Business ventures that failed. Partnerships that collapsed. Relationships that ended badly. None of us followed his life closely. Frankly, nobody cared anymore. His chapter was over. The more important story was our own. 2 years after Grandpa's passing, our family gathered for what would have been his birthday. The same house. The same dining room. The same Sunday tradition he loved. For the first time since his death, everyone attended. Including Emily. The atmosphere felt different. Lighter. Healthier. More genuine. During dinner, Mom raised a glass. To Grandpa. Everyone followed. Then Aunt Linda added something that made the entire table quiet. He'd be happy to see us together again. I looked around the room. At Mom. At my relatives. At the empty chair where Grandpa used to sit. Then my eyes landed on Emily. She looked emotional. But she was smiling. Not the polished smile she used when trying to impress people. Not the confident smile she wore during business meetings. A real smile. One that reached her eyes. For the first time in years, she looked at peace. Later that evening, after most guests had left, Emily and I stood on the back porch. The same porch where Grandpa and I had shared our final meaningful conversation. The sun was setting. Everything felt strangely calm. I wish I could apologize to him, Emily said quietly. I knew exactly who she meant. Me too. She looked across the yard. I spent so much time trying to prove I deserved everything. I nodded. And a tear rolled down her cheek. I forgot to appreciate what I already had. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then I remembered something Grandpa once told me. Money reveals people. At the time, I thought he meant it only exposed their flaws. Now I understood something deeper. Money reveals priorities. For some people, money becomes a tool. For others, it becomes a master. Emily had spent years letting it control her choices. Eventually it cost her the very thing she was trying to protect. Her reputation. Her relationship. Her family's trust. In the end, she learned the lesson the hardest way possible. She chose money over family. And almost lost both. Fortunately, almost isn't always forever. Some mistakes can be repaired. Some bridges can be rebuilt. Some families can heal. Not perfectly. But enough. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal. The lies. The greed. The heartbreak. The forgiveness. And I realized something important. The true inheritance Grandpa left behind wasn't his business. It wasn't his properties. It wasn't his money. It was the lesson hidden inside all of it. Never sacrifice the people who love you for things that can be replaced. Because money lost can be earned again. A reputation can sometimes recover. Even careers can be rebuilt. But the trust of family is one of the few things in life that becomes priceless once it's gone. And that's a lesson none of us will ever forget. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments.